The guest checked in just before the worst of the snow hit. He didn't speak, not even when I handed him the key, just nodded once and took room 6. The next morning we found the back door propped open with a piece of firewood. No tracks, no noise, just snow blowing in across the empty hallway and the faint sound of something dripping down the stairs. His boots were still inside, but the room was empty. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever worked somewhere that just didn't feel right. And if these stories help you fall asleep, I hope you'll join me again for the next one. My name's Dana Ellis. I was 37 when this happened, working full-time at a small mountain lodge in central Colorado. It was a quiet job, mostly off-season guests and storm closures. I didn't mind the slow pace. After my divorce, quiet felt like a luxury. That winter was colder than usual, especially up in the higher elevations. We'd get cut off by snow sometimes for a day or two at a stretch. Just me, a skeleton crew, and the guests who couldn't get down the mountain in time. The lodge had 12 rooms, an old fireplace in the lobby, and a vintage wood-paneled reception desk where I kept a space heater under my feet. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and dependable. I'd been there long enough to know which radiators made noise, which locks stuck in the cold, and which rooms we quietly avoided putting folks in unless everything else was full. Room 6 was one of those. It was the first big storm of the season, early November, but the snow came down hard sideways against the windows, the kind that coats everything, before you can even find your boots. That night we only had 2 guests checked in. One was a couple from Arizona who'd made the mistake of trying to see the Rockies before Thanksgiving. The other was the quiet man. He came in just before 10, shoulders dusted in white, no hat, no scarf. His coat looked too thin for the weather canvas, with the kind of lining you'd expect to see on a fall day, not a blizzard. I said, "Rough out there, huh?" He didn't answer, just pulled out a credit card. Didn't even glance at the rate sheet on the counter. His hands were dry. Not cracked like someone used to outdoor work, but more like paper thin and pale. The skin stretched just tight enough to notice. I remember that now. I asked for ID. He slid it over but kept his eyes on the door. I don't remember the name. I wrote it down, gave him the key to room 6, and told him breakfast was at 7 if the weather didn't knock the power out. He didn't respond. Just took the key and walked off, boots silent on the carpet. I watched the storm for a while after he went up. Len, the overnight guy, came in around 11 and made his usual pot of bad coffee. He's the type that likes to talk just to fill the air. "You see that guy check in?" he asked. I nodded. "Didn't say a word to me either," Len said. "Walked right past. Didn't even blink when I said hi." He laughed, but not the usual kind. More like a nervous chuckle. I don't like it when they don't blink. Sometime after midnight, the power flickered, just once. Long enough to reset the front desk clock and dim the hallway lights. I grabbed the flashlight and did a walkthrough just to make sure none of the breakers had tripped. Room 6 had the light on. I didn't knock, just checked the baseboard heaters through the vent in the hallway, made a note, and kept walking. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the first sound, not loud but odd, like wood dragging against stone, slow, dry, and deliberate. It came from the stairwell that leads down to the maintenance hallway and supply room. I called for Len. No answer. So I grabbed my flashlight again and went down one step at a time, the light catching flecks of dust in the air like snow hanging in place. Nothing. Just the old mop bucket by the boiler and a few storage crates. Then I noticed the back door. It was open, propped by a split piece of firewood from our supply pile. Snow had started drifting in across the threshold, a small pile forming against the first step. And footprints. There weren't any, not in or out. The snow was untouched, smooth, like someone had opened the door and just disappeared. I called Len on the walkie. Still no answer. When I went back upstairs, room 6 was quiet. The light was off. I knocked, no reply. The door wasn't latched. I eased it open with my foot. The room was empty. Bed-made key on the nightstand, boots lined neatly by the heater. But the window was locked from the inside, and the snow on the sill hadn't been disturbed. No coat, no bag, no guest. Len finally showed up around 4:00 a.m., said he'd been in the generator shed trying to prep in case the power went. I asked if he'd seen anyone leave. He shook his head. We checked the cameras. Nothing past midnight. No one at the back door. No movement in the hallway. But that morning, just before sunrise, I found something that still unsettles me. Out back, maybe 20 feet from the door, there was a circle. A perfect ring in the snow, like someone had stood there for a while, turning just enough to leave a groove with their boots. No path leading to it, no prints leading away. Just a silent shape melting slowly as the sun came up behind the ridge. I don't usually talk about this. It sounds too digital to be scary, like something a teenager would make up for clicks. But I still sleep with the blinds closed, and I haven't hiked off trail since. I was 28 when it happened, still single, living alone in a rental outside Jackson. I did freelance work during the week and hiked on weekends to clear my head. Just me, my camera, and sometimes a couple of old friends from college. That fall, a few of us planned a Saturday hike out past Bienville. The trails out there weren't exactly maintained, but we liked it that way. The less foot traffic, the better. It was me, Jordan, Rachel, and Will, the usual crew. We packed light, snacks, extra socks, water bottles. No cell signal, but that wasn't new. That was half the point. The air smelled like pine and old rain when we got there. Everything felt damp but not muddy, and there was this stillness in the woods that made you want to whisper, even when you didn't know why. We walked a few miles in before veering off the trail. We always did that once the main path got dull, just followed game trails or interesting ridge lines. I remember Jordan was the one who spotted the first cross. It was crooked, stuck halfway into the ground. Looked like someone had whittled it by hand. At first, we thought it was some kind of makeshift grave, maybe for a pet or something. Then Rachel noticed another one, and then a third. They were scattered all through the trees. Some were tipped over. A few had old cloth tied around the top, faded to brown like it used to be red. Then there were the dolls, little rag things made from what looked like corn husks, and string hung from the lower branches like ornaments. We thought maybe it was someone's weird folk art, or maybe part of some old hunting ritual. That's what I told myself anyway. But it didn't feel artistic. It felt preserved, like we weren't supposed to be there, like we'd wandered into something that remembered being used. We didn't talk much after that, just kept walking in a loop until we found the center. That's the only way I know how to describe it, the way everything seemed to aim inward. There was a big, older tree, thicker than the rest, almost split down the middle. and nailed into it were more bones, small ones. Maybe bird or fox, and what looked like human carvings beneath the bark. I took pictures, too many, close-ups of the dolls, the crosses, the tree itself, even a hoodie that had what looked like dried blood on it half buried under some leaves. Will told me to knock it off, said it felt wrong, but I figured I'd post them online later. Strange things found in the woods, that kind of thing. It felt removed, harmless. We didn't go any deeper. No one said it out loud, but we all just kind of turned at the same time and walked back the way we came. That should have been the end of it. I got home a little before dark, showered, made dinner, and pulled the SD card from my camera. I only posted 3 images, nothing identifying, no people, no coordinates, just some of the crosses and one of the dolls. It was after midnight when the first text came in. No message, just a photo. It was my driveway, the same angle I would use when checking the mail. My car was parked there, and the porch light was on. That photo had been taken minutes before I received it. I looked outside. Nothing. No sound, no wind, no movement. Just the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. I didn't sleep that night. Every time a car passed or the floor creaked, I flinched. I kept all the lights off, sat on the couch with my phone on the armrest, just watching. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I got another message. This one was closer. My front window taken from the yard. The curtain was half drawn, and I could see the faint blue glow of the TV in the background. I was in that room when the photo was taken. I ran to the window and yanked it open. Nothing. Just my front lawn, the sidewalk, the shadow of the oak tree, and still no footprints in the dew. The next morning I called Jordan. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I just asked if anything strange had happened since the hike. He was quiet for a second, then said, "Yeah, I got something." But it was just a blank screen, no photo. Rachel and Will hadn't gotten anything. Yet. I deleted the post immediately, took the pictures down from my computer, even reformatted the SD card. That night I installed a security camera on the front porch, just a motion sensor one with a floodlight. Basic, but something. Nothing happened while I was awake, but when I checked the footage the next morning, I found a clip time-stamped 2:47 a.m. A person, standing on my front steps. They never rang the bell, never knocked, just stood there for almost 5 minutes. The light never triggered. Their hood was up. They wore jeans. Something long hung from their neck, maybe a bone or a charm. At one point, they turned toward the camera. The face was completely obscured. I gave the footage to the police. They took the report, nodded a lot, said they'd patrol the area. But they didn't sound hopeful. Rachel called 2 days later crying. Her cat was gone. She'd found the back door wide open that morning. She always locked it. She lived alone, too, and after that she wouldn't stay at her place unless her brother was over. Will didn't say much, but when I saw him last, he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Said he was hearing things at night. Knocking sometimes, snapping branches, but no one ever there when he looked. The texts didn't stop, but they changed. No more pictures, just single words. Repent, return, watch. Sometimes just a blank notification at 2 or 3:00 a.m. I stopped opening them. I changed my number. Didn't help. The messages kept coming from untraceable short-digit sources. One morning I went outside and found something nailed to the tree in my backyard. A small wooden cross wrapped in twine and feathers. My fence gate was still locked, no tracks, no signs of anyone climbing over. I called the police again. Same response they took. The report said they'd file it. That night I slept in my car, parked 2 streets over. And then it stopped. No more messages. No more figures on camera. No more sounds in the dark. But I still think about that tree. The one with the bones. The one that looked like it had been used for years. Jordan moved out of state. Rachel quit hiking altogether. Will deleted every account he had. We don't talk much anymore. Not about that day. Not about the pictures. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed late at night, I still think I hear a soft knock. Just one. Just enough to make you wonder. And I never check, because I already know there's nothing outside. At least, not anymore. I grew up in a town that's so small it's not even marked on most maps. Just one road in, one road out, and a whole lot of corn in between. My brother Nate and I were close in the way siblings are when there's no one else to hang around with. We built bike ramps out of scrap wood, left chalk notes for each other on the mailbox, and made up dumb traditions that felt serious back then. One of them started when I was in 5th grade, a kind of unspoken war with the old man at the end of our road. His name was Mr. Delvin. He lived in a sagging brick house with yellow curtains and a broken porch swing that never moved even when the wind howled. The place sat right before the road turned to gravel and disappeared into the cornfields. Every Halloween he'd turn off his porch light by 6, lock his gate, and pretend the holiday didn't exist. So naturally, Nate and I made him our target. One year we left plastic spiders in his mailbox. Another time, Nate rigged up a speaker that screamed randomly from the bushes. It was childish, sure. But Delvin never said a word to our parents, never came to the door. He'd just stand at his window in that same stained undershirt, watching. Sometimes he'd mouth something we couldn't hear. One time I think I saw him smile. The year I turned 14, Halloween fell on a Saturday. Warm enough to stay out late with a full moon and barely any wind. Nate had just gotten his learner's permit and insisted this would be our final act, something worthy of the years we'd invested. He'd prepped for it. Smoke bombs, a motion sensor that screamed when someone got too close, and a doll he'd painted with fake blood and fitted with blinking LED eyes. We packed everything into a pillowcase and waited until 10:30, when most trick-or-treaters were done. The first weird thing was the decorations. Delvin's house was decorated for the first time ever. Paper skeletons taped to the windows, a crooked inflatable pumpkin wobbling on the porch, one of those plastic banners that read "Trick or Treat" in faded orange letters. It looked off, like someone had Googled Halloween and bought the cheapest decorations they could find. None of it was there earlier that week. It was all too new, too suddenly festive for someone who'd spent a decade pretending the day didn't exist. Nate grinned when he saw it. He's trying to bait us, wants to show us up. We circled to the back of the property and crouched behind the row of bushes by the tool shed. The porch light buzzed faintly, the only sound besides our breathing. Nate handed me the sound box. "Put this under the stairs. I'll set the doll by the window. Meet me by the shed after." I crept along the side yard, staying low. The grass was damp, but not fresh. I could smell the mildew and something faintly sweet like rotting apples. The inflatable pumpkin hissed softly as it deflated like it had a slow leak. That's when I felt the first flicker of hesitation. The house wasn't just dark. It was still. No glow from the TV like usual. No radio playing old songs through cracked speakers. The stillness felt intentional. I was about to place the sound box when I heard it a loud metallic clunk from the shed behind the house. Then nothing. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, just a pause that stretched too long. I whispered, "Nate, nothing." After a minute, I stood up and walked back toward the shed, heart thudding. The door was closed, padlocked, but it hadn't been earlier I saw Nate open it. I knocked softly. Nate. Still no answer. That's when I noticed the trail cam, small battery powered, mounted above the shed door. The red light blinked slowly, and nailed just below it was a cardboard sign, written in thick black marker, "Tricked." I froze. I wasn't sure why, but I suddenly felt watched not just from the house, but from every dark corner of that yard. I scanned the windows, nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me to do the wrong thing. I grabbed a rock and tried to hit the lock, but it just clanged uselessly against the metal. From inside, I thought I heard movement, shuffling, a soft thud. Maybe Nate trying to get my attention, or maybe not. My legs felt weak, my fingers buzzed. I backed away, then turned and ran straight for the road. The whole time, I expected to hear footsteps behind me. There weren't any. Just that deep quiet and the knowledge I'd left him back there. When I hit the end of the street, I stopped. Just stood under the yellow glow of the one working street lamp, breathing so hard I felt sick. I didn't want to go home without him, but I also didn't want to go back to that shed alone. I gave myself two options: wake up our parents or break into Delvin's house and figure it out myself. Neither felt good. Eventually, I circled back. The house looked exactly the same, but now the porch light was off. The decorations didn't move, and the shed still locked. I checked every window and door until I found one near the basement that had a rotting frame. I wedged in Nate's screwdriver and popped it loose, slipped inside. The basement smelled like wet leaves and metal. There were piles of dusty Halloween props, plastic hands, stretched out cobwebs, unopened masks still in packaging, like someone had been collecting the same decorations every year waiting. I crept upstairs, unlocked the back door from inside, and ran to the shed. This time I pried the hinge bolts loose instead of messing with the padlock. Inside, Nate sat on the floor, knees pulled to his chest. His eyes were wide, pale, but unhurt. He didn't say anything at first, just pointed. The inside of the shed was lined with photos, dozens of them, us. Halloween nights over the years, running past the house, laughing with our bags of props. There were even photos taken through our bedroom window, years apart, different seasons. Nate had tape on his wrists, but it hadn't been tight. Delvin hadn't hurt him. He just put him in there, locked the door, turned on the trail cam, like it was all part of some long, slow trap. We didn't tell our parents, didn't call the cops. We just stopped, never pranked anyone again, never walked past that house unless we had to. But every Halloween after that, Delvin decorated. Same cheap plastic skeletons, same flickering lights, same inflatable pumpkin that always deflated halfway through the night. I think that was the real message, not the shed, not the pictures. The message was, "I've been watching, and I'm still watching." I drive through that town once or twice a year now, usually with my wife, sometimes with our kid in the back seat. I never take the old road. But every now and then, when we're just far enough out from town and the sun's starting to set, I think about that shed, the cardboard sign, the trail cam blinking red in the dark. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone back. I've lived in Illinois my whole life. One of those towns where your parents grew up with your teachers, and everyone knows what car you drive before you get your license. When this happened, I was 18 and a few months from graduation. My girlfriend at the time, Brooke, had been the one steady part of a year that was otherwise slipping off the rails. It started small, just a message. A girl I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone from middle school DM'd me on Instagram out of nowhere. Her name was Megan. We'd dated for maybe 3 months in 7th grade, if you can even call that dating. We held hands behind the gym and passed notes in class. I remembered her being funny. A little intense, maybe, but back then that just meant texting too many emojis. She said she saw a post of mine and wanted to say hi. That's it. And at first, that's all it was. We talked a little, nothing serious. She told me she'd moved to a nearby town, was working part-time, and asked if I still played guitar. I told her about Brooke. She said she was happy for me. But the messages kept coming, longer now, more often. Sometimes late at night, like 2 or 3 in the morning. I didn't answer those, but I read them. That was my mistake. There was one message where she said she still dreamed about our old hallway at school, how she'd replay conversations we'd had and think about what she could have said differently. That one stuck with me. Not because it was flattering, because it felt off. Too vivid, too practiced. Like she'd been thinking it through for years. I showed Brooke the messages. She laughed at first, but not the second time, or the third. A week later, Megan showed up at a diner Brooke and I went to every Saturday. Same time, same booth. She didn't say anything, just sat alone in the back and stared. Brooke pretended not to notice, but I could tell it rattled her. Then Brooke started getting messages. Not from Megan's account, from an anonymous one with no profile picture. Just nasty, personal things. Enjoy being the placeholder. He'll leave you like he left me. The account sent old photos. Ones I'd forgotten existed. Stuff from middle school. Nothing explicit, but still deeply embarrassing. One was of me with braces and eyeliner from a dumb phase. I had only ever sent that to Megan. I tried blocking the account, but new ones kept popping up. Slight variations of her name. Always blank profiles, always the same tone. I stopped sleeping through the night. My phone would buzz, and I'd feel sick before I even looked. Megan never confronted us directly. That was the worst part. She just appeared. Once at a gas station 2 towns over. Another time parked outside Brooke's job. Then again sitting in a car on my street at night. Not moving. Just sitting there with the lights off. It was always the same car. A black Nissan Altima with one missing hubcap. After a while, I didn't need to see her to know it was her. I told my parents. My dad said, "Girls get emotional, son. It'll blow over." My mom told me to block her again. Brooke's parents tried to help. They even offered to talk to Megan's parents until Megan denied everything and said we were harassing her. That flipped something. Suddenly, Brooke's parents didn't want us seeing each other. Too much drama. They made Brooke block me. and just like that, I was alone with it. I tried going to the school counselor. They told me since it was all online and she didn't go to our school, there wasn't much they could do. That's when I started keeping a log, screenshots, license plate photos, times, dates, all of it. One night I came home from work around 10:30. My dad was watching TV, the kitchen light was on. I went to take out the trash and saw her car again. This time, closer, just parked across the street, engine running. I walked straight toward it, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. But she pulled away before I got too close. No eye contact, no gestures, just gone. The final straw was Brooke's call. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She said someone had been knocking on her window for 5 minutes. Not tapping, knocking, hard, relentless. Her dad ran out with a flashlight, but whoever it was had already vanished. Brooke swore she saw Megan's face, just for a second, peeking in eyes wide before ducking out of sight. That night I called the police again. I gave them everything, screenshots, timelines, photos. They took the report, promised to follow up. They never did. Then just like that, it stopped. No more messages, no more fake accounts, no more car. Megan vanished from my life as quietly as she'd returned. And somehow that made it worse. I didn't trust the silence. Still don't. Brooke and I never really got back together after that. Her parents didn't want it, and I think she was just tired. Tired of being scared. Tired of explaining something that felt impossible to prove. I deleted social media for a while, stayed offline completely. But every now and then I'd check Megan's account, not to message her, just to see. Last I looked, she was engaged, smiling in a photo with a guy from another town. Looked perfectly normal, happy even. I stared at that picture for a long time, tried to find some trace of what she'd done to us, some crack in the mask. But there was nothing, just another face in the feed. I still get anxious when I see black Altimas. I still flinch when I hear someone knock, even if it's just the mailman. And sometimes I wonder if she's watching, or worse, waiting. I moved to rural Missouri in early spring of 2023, hoping for a quieter life after the mess my divorce left behind. The house was modest, 2 bedrooms, a sloped backyard, and a wall of trees that made it feel more remote than it really was. Cassville wasn't far, maybe 15 minutes by car, but you wouldn't guess it standing on the back porch. The lot backed up to a patch of woods that looked bigger than it was, especially when the wind picked up. I could sit out there with coffee and hear nothing but birds, insects, and the creak of old branches shifting overhead. I worked from home doing CAD design for small construction firms, so peace and quiet was more than just a perk. It was the whole reason I moved. 2 weeks after I settled in, I decided to build a fence along the back property line. Nothing fancy, just treated posts and slats. Enough to give me a little privacy from whatever wandered through those trees. That was the plan, anyway. It was a Saturday morning, still damp from the rain the night before. I borrowed an auger from the guy down the road, Bill, a retired mechanic, who waved with 2 fingers and spoke, like each word cost him something. I started digging around 9. First 2 holes were easy. The third took longer roots, packed clay, maybe some rock. The 4th hole stopped me cold. I hit something that didn't feel like stone or wood. It gave just slightly when I pressed into it, so I dropped to my knees and started clearing it out by hand. The first thing I saw was bone. Long, pale, curved in a way that didn't feel right. At first, I told myself it had to be deer or maybe a hunting dog, but the more I cleared, the worse that theory held up. There was part of a skull, not whole but enough to know it wasn't animal. I didn't touch it after that, just sat back on the grass and stared at the hole for a while. I called the sheriff's department, not 911, just the non-emergency line. Sheriff Dalton came out himself, middle-aged, clean-shaved, the kind of guy who wore mirrored sunglasses even in the shade. He barely glanced at the hole. "Probably a cow," he said. "People used to bury livestock out here. Or a hunting dog, like you said." I pointed at the bone again. "That doesn't look like any animal I've seen." He smiled without his eyes. "Wouldn't be the first time someone called us over a chicken coop skeleton." He didn't take a sample, didn't ask to rope it off, just thanked me for calling and drove off in his black SUV tires, kicking up red clay as he left. I sat on my porch for nearly an hour after that, staring at the hole. There was something about the way he dismissed it that stuck in my ribs. Not because I wanted it to be something dark, I didn't. I just couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he let on. I didn't touch the hole the rest of the day. Packed up the auger, returned it to Bill without much conversation. That Monday, something odd happened. I was working in the kitchen when I saw Sheriff Dalton's SUV pull into my driveway again. Only this time he wasn't in uniform. Jeans, flannel shirt, 2 cups of coffee in a cardboard tray. He smiled like we were old friends, said he was in the neighborhood. Thought I might want to talk more about the backyard. I let him in. Not because I trusted him, I didn't, but because I wanted to see what he'd say. We made small talk at the kitchen table. Weather, local hardware stores, fishing spots. Then he leaned forward just slightly and said, "If you ever think about moving again, let me know. I've always liked this patch of land." I laughed nervously. "I just got here." He nodded. "Still, if you're thinking about it, I could offer cash. Wouldn't need to go through any of that real estate red tape." He took a sip of his coffee like he hadn't just said something strange. After he left, I watched him drive off. His SUV dipped low as it hit the edge of the yard. That's when I saw the mud caked around his wheel wells. Same red clay as my backyard. Same spots I'd been digging. Only I hadn't touched it since Saturday. That night, I couldn't sleep. The old house creaked more than usual. Every gust of wind made the porch boards groan. Around 2 a.m., I grabbed a flashlight and went out back. The hole was different. Not filled in, not obvious. But the soil had shifted, packed tighter. And there was a faint indentation like something had been lifted, then lightly patted back into place. I hadn't touched it, and I was the only one with a key to the gate. The next morning, I called Jason, a friend from college who now worked as a forensics tech in Springfield. I didn't give him all the details, just said I'd found something odd and needed a second opinion. He agreed to come out that weekend with some soil sampling tools. Just a few days. But 2 days before Jason was supposed to arrive, my house was broken into. Nothing stolen, nothing ransacked. Just my laptop, missing the one I used to email Jason, take notes, check maps. That was it. I didn't call the police, not because I didn't want help. I just didn't know if I could trust the help I'd get. Jason still came that Saturday. We went straight to the hole. Someone had filled it in completely, packed it tight, tossed a few rocks on top like it had been that way for years. Jason took a soil sample anyway, said he'd test it. Maybe there'd be trace remains, something. To show it had been disturbed, but nothing ever came of it. He said it wasn't conclusive. Could have been anything, he said. But it feels off. I didn't need the test to tell me that. I put the house up for sale a month later. Didn't tell the buyers anything. They were older. Said they wanted somewhere quiet to retire. I gave them a discount and signed the papers fast. I moved out by the end of summer. Haven't seen Sheriff Dalton since. Haven't driven through Cassville either. I live closer to the city now. More lights, more people, less red clay. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still picture that hole, that partial skull, that moment where I knew, not guessed, but knew that it wasn't supposed to be found, and that someone had been waiting for me to stop asking questions. I moved into that apartment during my second year of college because it was the only place I could afford without needing a roommate. The building was a 4-unit block tucked behind an abandoned gas station and some overgrown lots on the west side of town. It had no real address sign, no landscaping, just cracked pavement, peeling stucco, and a sagging stairwell that creaked like it was always about to give. My unit was on the second floor, and the one above mine that had supposedly been vacant for over a year. No one's touched it since the last guy left, Mr. Landry had told me. He said it like it was meant to be reassuring. I didn't push for details. Back then, I just wanted peace and a reliable lock. At first, it was quiet. The walls were thin, but with no neighbors above me, I got used to falling asleep with my windows open and leaving music on while I studied. The first time I heard footsteps overhead, it was close to 2 a.m. I remember pausing my playlist and just listening. They were slow, uneven steps, like someone pacing just a few feet at a time. I told myself it had to be the pipes. The building was old, probably settling. But then it happened again, the next night. Same time, same rhythm. A few steps, pause, turn, repeat. I texted Mr. Landry. He replied the next day with 2 words, still vacant. He added, probably just pipes, followed by a shrug emoji. That was the last I heard from him for weeks. After that, I stopped asking. But the sounds didn't stop. I started noticing other things, too. The air would feel different at night, heavier, like the kind of stillness you get before a thunderstorm. Sometimes I'd wake up out of nowhere, heart racing, completely sure someone was watching me. Not from the window, from above. I'd lie there frozen, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between creaks. It always happened between 2 and 3 a.m. Never earlier, never later. One night I heard something drop a solid thud right above my bedroom. So I finally decided to check the stairwell that led to the top unit. The door wasn't locked. The knob was barely attached. The frame around it had splintered like someone had kicked it in from the inside. I stood there for maybe a full minute, hand on the loose knob, not breathing. Then I did something stupid. I pushed it open. The stairwell smelled like wet wood and dust. It was completely dark, no overhead light, no windows. My flashlight caught scuff marks on the wall like someone had been dragging their hand or something else all the way up. At the top of the stairs, the apartment door was cracked open just slightly, wide enough to see a sliver of the floor inside. I nudged it with the edge of my foot. It opened without resistance. The unit was empty. No furniture, no power. Except there was one thing, a mattress. Old, torn at the edges, sitting directly in the center of the living room, which happened to be right above my bedroom. I walked in far enough to shine my light across it. There were stains, dark reddish-brown blotches soaked deep into the fabric like they'd been there a long time. Not mildew, not coffee. I knew what I was looking at. My stomach dropped. I backed out fast, didn't turn around, just stepped out into the stairwell and pulled the door shut behind me with shaking hands. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the lights on and every window locked. And at 3:36 a.m., the footsteps came back. Only this time, they didn't pace. They stopped right above me, the same spot where I'd seen the mattress. 3 heavy thuds spaced like someone had dropped to their knees. The ceiling creaked under the weight. But the sound didn't echo like it was coming from a hollow, abandoned space. It felt closer, like someone was kneeling right there on the floor, pressing down between us. The next morning, I went back up. I had my phone in one hand and a small can of pepper spray in the other. But when I reached the top, the door was shut, perfectly flush. The lock fixed. The knob brand new. The frame was clean, no splinters, like it had never been forced open. I still had the photo I took of the broken frame from the night before. I showed it to Mr. Landry later that day. He gave me a tight smile and said, "That unit's been sealed for months. You sure you weren't dreaming?" Then he changed the subject. After that, the noises stopped. No more pacing, no more thuds, no more sounds from above. But the silence wasn't comforting. It felt intentional, like whatever had been there now knew I was aware of it. I started staying late at the library, crashing at friends' places when I could. I just didn't want to be in that apartment, especially not alone. Still, I kept telling myself I'd imagined most of it. That maybe the mind fills in gaps when it doesn't understand what it's hearing. Until I came back from a weekend out of town. Everything looked normal when I walked in, but when I stepped into my bedroom, I noticed the ceiling. There were 3 small dents in the drywall perfectly spaced, directly above the bed, right where the mattress had been. I left that night, didn't sleep there again, ended the lease a month early. I didn't explain why. It's been years now, but I still think about that apartment, that upstairs door, those footsteps, and the pressure in the air just before they started. Whatever was up there, it knew I was listening, and for one long, awful moment, it had listened back. I got my start delivering groceries through an app the year I turned 33. It wasn't the plan, just something that filled the gap after a layoff. Most of the time, I stuck to towns near Boise. But every now and then, the system would route me out to places you couldn't even find on the map unless you zoomed all the way in. That's how I ended up in Thistle Creek. It was late November, just before the first real snow. I picked up a grocery order in Emmett and saw the drop-off was almost 50 miles north. The app offered me a bonus, so I took it. The road out was winding and mostly empty. Patches of old frost hugged the guardrails, and radio stations faded in and out with the turns. I arrived around 4:30 p.m., and found the town half empty. One diner, a library, a handful of houses with steep metal roofs. Most had plastic sheeting taped over the windows like they were expecting something worse than cold. The order was for a woman named Delmer. I pulled up to her house, a squat little building tucked between the library and what looked like an abandoned barber shop. There were no lights on. I knocked, waited, then knocked again. Just when I was about to leave, the door creaked open a few inches. A woman's voice, raspy but polite, told me to leave the bag inside. She said she had the money in an envelope on the table. I stepped into the front room, careful not to track in mud. It smelled like mothballs and wood smoke. The light was dim, filtered through thick curtains. The envelope was right where she said it would be. But next to it was something else, a photo. 3 people standing on a porch that looked just like the one I was standing in. One of them was definitely Mrs. Delmer, maybe 30 years younger. The other 2 were boys, teenagers. The photo had a date written in pen Octa 31, 1987. I didn't touch it, just took the envelope, thanked her through the door, and left. When I got back to my car, I opened the app to mark the delivery complete. But the order was gone. No record of it. No way to report it. It just vanished like it had never been there. That might have been the end of it, except a week later, I passed through Thistle Creek again. I was headed elsewhere, but the shortcut cut right through town. The diner had a few trucks out front. I stopped for coffee and asked the woman behind the counter if she knew a Mrs. Delmer. She stared at me for a long time before answering. Then she asked, "What house did you deliver to?" I pointed through the window. She frowned. "That place burned down 4 years ago. Nothing left but the porch. I thought she was messing with me. Until I walked over there. There really wasn't anything left. No door, no roof, just the outline of the foundation and a few charred posts. And something else, that photo. It was nailed to one of the beams, same faces, same date, except this time someone had drawn an X over one of the boys' heads. I left town fast. Drove straight to the next city and didn't look back. That night I got a message through the app. No name, just an address in Thistle Creek and a note that said, "She says the second one's almost ready." I deleted the app the next day, and to this day I don't take jobs north of Emmett. I used to drive cross-country every month for work. Back then, I sold refrigeration parts to restaurants and truck stops, and the job kept me on the road more than I was ever home. That's how I ended up spending a night in Ely, Nevada in the summer of 2004. They call U.S. Route 50 the loneliest road in America, and I believe it. There are stretches where you can drive 50 miles without seeing another set of headlights. That evening I was already worn down by the desert sun when I pulled into town looking for somewhere cheap to sleep. The only vacancy I found was a squat little motel on the edge of Ely. Faded red doors, buzzing neon sign that said simply, "Motel." The kind of place where the paint curls at the edges of every window frame. The clerk was an older man with thin white hair and a voice like dry paper. He checked me in without asking many questions. I remember he didn't even swipe my credit card, just handed me a brass key with a tag that read Room 5. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cigarettes, though the sign on the wall said it was non-smoking. The carpet was stiff, the bedspread patterned with little diamonds that looked gray under the weak overhead light. It was quiet, though, and after 12 hours behind the wheel, that was all I wanted. I left the curtains cracked an inch just to let in some of the desert air and lay down. I had almost drifted off when I heard a knock on the wall. Not my door. The wall. A steady tap, tap, tap from the adjoining room. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another guest. But it didn't stop. The tapping came in groups of 3, paused, then started again. almost like someone signaling. I banged back once, hoping they'd take the hint. The sound stopped immediately. An hour later, I woke to it again, this time softer, more deliberate. 3 taps, silence, 3 more. I pressed my ear to the wall and thought I heard breathing. That was enough to keep me awake until dawn. When I stepped outside in the morning, the door to room 6, the room next to mine, was wide open. Inside the bed was unmade a suitcase, half unzipped clothes neatly folded on the chair, but no one was there. I told the clerk what I'd seen. He only shook his head and said, "Room 6 hasn't been rented in months." I argued certain I'd heard someone. He just pushed the register toward me. I flipped through the pages, and sure enough, the last entry for room 6 was from the spring, 3 months earlier. I asked if maybe someone had slipped in during the night, but he said the locks were changed after the last tenant left. Then he looked at me in a way I can still picture. Not surprised, not even concerned. Just tired, like it wasn't the first time he'd heard it. I left without pressing further. When I drove away, I glanced back at the building. Every door was shut except room 6. The curtains there shifted like someone had moved them with a hand, but there was no one in sight. I never stayed in Ely again. That was the last story I wanted to share tonight. Thinking back on all these places, motels, cabins, quiet stretches of road, I realize how ordinary they are on the surface. Just places built for people passing through. But maybe that's what makes them dangerous. Nobody stays long enough to ask questions. Nobody notices when something feels just a little bit wrong. These aren't famous landmarks or haunted mansions. They're the in-between spaces, the forgotten corners of America. And it's in those places where the strange things wait. They don't shout. They whisper through walls, knock in the dark, leave doors open that should be locked. Most of the time, you can ignore it. Pretend it isn't there. But if you've ever felt that weight in your chest, that certainty, you weren't as alone as you thought then, you know? Some of those moments never leave you. They stay quiet, but they stay with you forever. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If you'd like to hear more late-night stories like these, please follow the channel, subscribe, and share this with someone who might listen tonight. And tell me, have you ever stayed somewhere that felt wrong, even though nothing seemed out of place?